I'm Jeff Fritz with SoundStage.com, and I'm joined today by Kostas Metaxas of Metaxas Sins, who is based in the Netherlands, but today joins us from Greece to tell us about a company that started in Australia. Kostas, how are you today?
I'm fine. Nice to meet you, Jeff.
Nice to meet you. So, Kostas, I want to jump right in and have you tell us about Metaxas Sins. You know, I've wanted to connect with you for some time. Your products are, I think I can safely say, the most unique in the high-end audio industry. And I've been wanting to learn about them myself for some time. So take it away and tell us about Metaxas Sins and how it got started and a little bit about the products.
I think the starting point was very simple. As a teenager, I loved music. I probably wanted to be a musician, but my parents couldn't see being Greek in Australia, couldn't see the logic of a musician career. So basically, I started listening to music and, of course, building my own equipment because I couldn't afford it as a kid, obviously, in those days. And I think the epiphany for me that made me realize that high-end audio could be more was actually when I got a pair of quad electrostatics. And I was only 14 years old, and I set them up and I played some records that were recorded in England that I knew were recorded with quad electrostatics. And to be honest, it was such a window into the orchestra that I thought to myself, my God, you can actually get that visceral gut feel of something really happening in front of you. Obviously, not the whole big picture, but a small vignette of that. And that's what got me hooked, that I could get into the emotion of the music. And the other thing with things like electrostatics in those days as a kid, I learned that you didn't need to listen very loudly because, of course, as a young kid, most people were listening, ridiculous levels, and which is important because then that's why my hearing still works. And, people don't realize how much damage they can or did back in the day. Anyway, so the speakers also had another thing that they did, which was very unique to me, and that was I could feel the music. I could feel the air being sort of moved in the room. It wasn't just a sort of sound thing. It was a feeling that you were there thing. And that basically was my starting point. So for me, that intrigued me. And so obviously I couldn't afford to buy the big brands in those days because I was only a kid and, obviously didn't have the money. And so I got to slowly just doing my own thing, building my own kits at the start, and then just progressing with that. And then when I had to go to Germany to study at university level, I took some of my amplifiers with me. And some of the hi-fi crazy guys, because Germany's a very big market, as you probably know, for hi-fi. And of course, it's nowadays producing some of the best hi-fi as well. And of course, it did back then even. So when I was in Germany, I had my own equipment with me because I was going to be there for 6 or 7 years. And some of my friends their fathers were audiophiles and had all the big names that we still hear of today, the Levinsons, the Macintosh, all that sort of stuff. They were intrigued by this Australian Greek with this little amplifier that he had with him. So they set up a meeting with one of the top shops in Germany, in Mannheim at the time. And they said, bring it along, let's compare it to some of the serious things. Just so then you can get an idea of, how good it is. And at the time, I was a bit, of course, why not? Because I had nothing to lose. So we did that. And the upshot was, that my amplifiers were a lot better. And I was a bit, well, see, the thing is, I think the joke of life is, if you don't know how good something is supposed to be, you don't then design it to be as good as that. You actually, if you believe the music should sound like real music, then that's your reference point. And so for me, that was my reference point. And when we compared the amplifiers, the other amplifiers, which are all well-known brands, just didn't sound as real. They didn't sound as emotional. I think that's the other word. And so at the time, the guy who owned the shop said, listen, can I buy this? And I said, no, I can't, because I'm going to be stuck here for 6 years and I need to listen to music. And so he said, listen, why don't you make this? I'll order, 20 or 30 pieces. And of course, I had to then balance what I was going to do as a career. So, of course, clearly the thing for music was more important than anything else. And back in those days, I was there to study what was called medical technology. That was the infancy of things like lasers and all this in medicine. And I was into the tech side of medicine type of thing. But I thought, no, by the time this ever becomes mainstream, which it is nowadays, of course, it's going to take a long time. So I thought, bugger it, do the music. So I came back to Australia. My parents were totally pissed because they'd sent me all the way over there to become, something to do with medicine. And of course, they couldn't understand, how I was going to make a living. The typical Greek, way of thinking, how are you going to survive doing hi-fi? And so that's how it started back then. And I was very fortunate at the time because of my, when those amplifiers I did make went to Europe, they became the reference for the German press, which was, again, I was only 20 odd years old, 21. And I had a friend of mine who was he used to teach German at the ANU University in Canberra. And when he was doing the translations of the reviews in a magazine called Das Ohr, which was like Harry Pearson's Absolute Sound in Germany, he said, they think this stuff is incredible. And I'm sort of thinking, yeah, sure, you're just embellishing it. So that's how it started, but only because I didn't know any better. I didn't know it shouldn't be that good or not that good or whatever, and my barometer was always that. And so then when I made it as a business, I was also thinking the same thing, thinking, well, how am I going to progress it? How am I going to push it? And of course, back in those days, as you probably are aware, and I'm sure you're probably my vintage as well, the turntable reigned supreme. And just by chance, I got to know the guys at Goldmund. This is back when Revachon was based in France. And so I became the importer in Australia. So I thought, this actually helped me because it got me to understand other products. And I started looking at, some of the other gear that was available at the time. And but I still felt that the turntables were not that good. And another friend of mine in Switzerland, who was involved with my business back then, said, why don't you try tape recorders? And so in those days, the companies like Nagra and Stellavox and all that were still going. I mean, Nagra still goes today, but of course, it doesn't produce tape recorders. But back then, I had the choice. I went to Nagra in Switzerland, and I went to Stellavox in Switzerland, and I resonated more with Georges Kelly from Stellavox. And then the funny thing was, I also found out from Georges that Mark Levinson had been there working in the factory a few years earlier. And this is the joke of life again. And but I could see why Mark would prefer the Stellavox back in those days, was because of its simplicity and its beauty. So in fact, that inspired him to go off and become what he became. And so then that's the irony of life, how at the end, the real master of all this was Georges Kelly of Stellavox, who actually inspired Mark to do what he did, and of course inspired me in a lot of ways too to do what I did. But at the time I had a Goldman reference, which was supposed to be the best turntable on earth, and the only other people that had one was Jadi, because they were close with the people who designed it, the crazy French architects who actually designed it. And then of course Harry Pearson had one a bit later. But for me, I still felt that the turntable wasn't that great. And of course, most records come from master tapes. So I went to Stellavox, got their machines, took one of their little machines to Geelong Grammar, where Charles, the Royal, went and studied in Australia. And they invited me to record some concerts there because they were actually interested in the time to get a tape recorder to do recordings themselves. So I went, set up 2 microphones, a tape recorder. I recorded one of the chaps who taught there called Boris Gaslitzer, and he was so much like listening to Sviatoslav Richter, who was my idol of piano at the time. And the joke was, the recording I did, the first recording I ever did, I had some chap, crazy guy called Fratelli in Italy saying, this is like, Red Seal and all this. And I was thinking, what? So basically, my life has been that, meaning clearly I have a talent about music and about its reproduction, and I think more importantly, knowing when something is more real, more emotional, rather than trying to dissect it into mid-range and bass and all this sort of stuff. And that has informed me. But of course, 40 years ago, we're talking now, as you know, the heyday of the industry in a lot of ways. But by comparison, I think if you sort of fast forward to now, what my objects are compared to what they were back then. Back then, I was an engineer doing electronics, and now I'm an artist doing art objects that also have the double benefit of giving an emotional, sort of more than just the physical look of them, but also that they are functional art. And to me, I think that's where I think my things sit today compared to, say, the normal hi-fi equipment you see out there.
And, that's a great segue into my next question, because I remember seeing your first, the products as they are today, several years ago. I think it was leading up maybe to Munich, the show in Munich, and I remember seeing some of the photos, and maybe they were renderings at the time, I'm not sure, but I remember seeing them and I was just amazed, and it didn't look like something that could even be manufactured. It was just so different. And so I guess my next question is, where does the inspiration come from to make the products? Because, obviously, like you said, the electronics design you've been working on for decades, but the physical form, the art objects that you're producing, where does the inspiration come from?
It's hard to say there's one or two things that inspire you. It's a lifetime that inspires you. But the key was, for me, the irony was, up until 5 years ago, I was thinking of doing hi-fi objects, but I was very difficult to come up with a language that would translate artistically, sculpturally, as well as electronically. And in fact, the irony was I was doing some work for other companies at the time as a designer, and because I worked for people like Estée Dupont, the pen people in France, Lepere, the clock people in Switzerland, quite a few of the Italian furniture people, and I was actually doing a Chez Lounge for an Italian furniture company at the time, and that gave me the feeling for something that I wanted to do, or I thought I could do in hi-fi. And so that was the starting point. So that became just the amplifiers, the first amplifiers you saw probably 5 years ago. But of course I had to create something, and then the real challenge was to get it made. And so the difficulty was, where do you go to do this crazy stuff? So we found a producer in Germany who happened to be an audio crazy guy too, because to be honest, normal company looking at what I was doing at the time, would just say, "Come on, you're serious or what?" So he was crazy CAD guy. So he said, "Yeah, we could probably do that." And he does all sorts of special stuff for Formula One and all these sort of superchargers and stuff for Porsche and all this. So he's sort of no stranger to crazy. And so when he saw the first amplifier, which was the Icarus, which is the simplest first thing I did, and I thought, let's start here and see what happens. We did the first one, but there was a mistake when it was being milled that it ended up damaging it. And, because it was so expensive, he basically said, look, if you want to do it again, you're going to have to pay for it. I can't afford to do it again, gratis. So at that point, it was like the juncture between this is not going to happen or it's going to happen. So I ended up having to fork out another amount of money. And remember, all this was very experimental, and a lot of money we're talking now. And, for a case, we're talking about an amplifier box. So basically I did that, and he got the second one absolutely perfect. And that's where you started seeing in Munich about 5 years ago, I think it was 2016, I think, or 17, 2016. What happened was, by that stage, I'd done a few of the different designs for the amplifiers, and we presented them for the first time in Munich. And of course, a lot of people didn't even believe that they were made out of aluminium. They thought they were plastic or something. And but the most important thing was that I created something that could be made. And so then after that, it was pushing the envelope. And so, for example, the speakers that's another crazy thing. But it's not just one piece. The speakers are essentially 6 pieces. I'm talking about the sirens behind me. There's 6 pieces of aluminium. And not only do you have to sculpt into one piece, and then have to cut it into sections that can be machined. So it's a real challenge as an engineer, as a designer, as an artist, and then of course trying to make it work, because you and I know the acoustics properties of materials in hi-fi are critical, particularly for a speaker. So you had to make it certain thicknesses, all these sorts of things. So it was a real difficult challenge. But anyway, we got there, we did all that. And so the first things I did, of course, were the things that you saw back then. And then we did a headphone amplifier, because I do believe that the future is the youth. And I also believe that high-end audio as we know it is changing. And you can't stay in that same lane of the same old stuff. So that's why at the moment I'm working on electrostatic headphones, for example, but again with a twist. And of course, the other thing that I brought out recently, which was a real, just to sort of create more drama in my life, was tape recorders, because I always loved my tape recorders and I wanted to get back into recording again. And I tried all the digital things and even developing some digital things, but they didn't have that I don't know how to explain it, but it doesn't have that richness of tape. And so basically I then made the stupid mistake of then wanting to do a tape recorder. And fortunately, I was able to do it because I found the right people to help me with it. Because the problem is, unlike a lot of other industries where you can go and find some old chap from, say, Stellavox or Nagra or Studer for that matter, and say, hey, Fritz, sorry to use your name in vain there, come over and help me make this new tape recorder. The truth of the matter is, the technology that was done in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s is totally irrelevant in terms of the actual turning of the reels. That's now totally different than what it was. So you almost need to find someone in another parallel universe. And luckily, as you know, this is where, again, these little serendipitous things in life, where somehow, like I go back to the old quads, those old quads were crazy speakers, but they did certain things so well that it enabled you to realize that the possibilities were there, that you could actually transcend something. And so luckily, with the help of a few people and with my experience with working with the Stellavox machines, the big one and the small one, I was able to cobble something together. And of course, the first thing was just to get it to work. And we finally did that a year ago, thankfully. And so we're selling those now. But the joke is, when I was doing that, going through that ordeal, I honestly thought to myself, I'm nuts. They're the moments in life where you think you've really bitten off more than you can chew. You really, you say, okay, I'm a challenge junkie, but this is just too much. And of course, you could also understand why nobody does tape recorders. And after you do it, you realize why nobody does tape recorders.
Well, I remember seeing when I saw the first pictures of the tape recorder, I think the first thing that hit me was this man, like you said, that this guy's crazy. He makes everything now. I mean, if it has to do with high-end audio, he's got the entire system, all the electronics, and now he's got a tape recorder. And what I really liked, and what I think was maybe the most impressive thing, is that if you were to, like, looking at your brochure and you just see all the products one after another, they're all so different, but then they fit together. The design language is so similar from product to product, but they're so very unique. And it's just such an impressive, it makes everything else just look mundane, frankly. And
No,
it's just
look,
such an
I love
impressive thing from
hearing
a
it.
design standpoint.
Now, look, the thing is, what I believe honestly, Jeff, without the hoopla and the marketing and all that, excuse me, the BS of hi-fi, as we both know, there's a lot of BS in hi-fi. The future for high-end audio, in my opinion, is it's a luxury business. It's a business similar to someone who likes tourbillon watches or, collects art. And we have to go down that road. And unfortunately, if you do it as an electronic engineer with a normal box, with the normal stuff, it's not going to cut it, because you and I know how many objects. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful amplifiers out there. I mean, they're very industrial looking, all that sort of stuff. And they're very expensive. You're talking $50,000, $100,000, and they're just a box. And you and I know in 100 years or in 50 years, will they come up in Sotheby's at an auction or Christie's at an auction, and will they be worth more than what they were worth now? And I honestly think the only chance you have is if you make something, I mean, this is my way of thinking, something that is going to have some real value, not just because it makes music, but also because it's the epitome, it's the whole package is so, thought out and so individual and so beautiful that it touches you. It really, you feel it as a piece of sculpture. You also feel it as a piece for the music it produces and all those sorts of things as well. So for me, that is the key, because look, back in the day, 40 years ago, I had to do things in a production way. I had to make 20 of this, 40 of this, etc. And to be honest, it's demoralizing and dehumanizing. That wasn't me. I had to do it because it was a business, and I was happy doing what I was doing back then. But nowadays, I ask myself, and I still see, of course, quite a few of my pieces from 40 years ago still, floating around, people still using it. But I ask myself, is that going to be around another 50 years or not? And I think there's very few products that will be around in 50 years or 100 years that are going to be testimony. I mean, you look today at the fashion of high-end audio, you see now everyone's going back to horns in a big, big way. Single-ended triodes from the 20s and the 30s, big way. So you see, there's certain things that worked well, that resonated with people, and there's that artistic vision, and therefore they've become interesting. But again, what will survive us? And now, of course, I've got my kids involved, and my eldest is an electronic engineer. He's working at the moment in the automotive world, which is great, because in the automotive world, they have to make stuff that's totally reliable to the nth degree, which is a good thing to learn. My youngest son, he did a stage at DuPont and at Lepere, the clocks, so he's more creative side of it too, which is good. So that can obviously add to what I'm doing. So I see that to be, for me, that's the pleasure I get. Obviously I'm not making thousands of pieces, thank God. I make very small, limited editions, and each one is handmade. So it's not, we're not talking, a huge volume, but I love it. To me, it's, you see on Facebook, if you want to see what I'm up to, look at Facebook and you'll see what thing I'm actually doing. So, and the funny thing about that is I think that's where social media is fantastic. So you actually see, the evolution of something. For example, right now, I've got the big tape recorder over here, and I'm just waiting for my chap to come out. So he'll spend a couple of months here, and we'll get that going and singing and dancing and all that stuff too. So to me, that is the big pleasure I get from doing what I do. So it's the pleasure of creating, the pleasure of producing and making, and of course then talking to crazy customers who also love what you do, and also realize that, this is Formula One. You're really trying to push boundaries. You're not just making something to make a living, so to speak. So that to me is also where hi-fi is, in all honesty, is great. But also why, I also make watches. I could do other things. But the irony is the high-end audio business is ripe for someone crazy like me to come in and just blow people's minds and hope that helps other people do the same. So then it inspires, it pushes, and it helps the industry go in the direction where it's not becoming just a thing on the side for just a few crazy people, but can be seen mainstream, like say Ferraris and all that sort of stuff. So that's to me the pleasure you get. But obviously that's because of the creative side. The business, it's not a business to make gazillions. I'm not going to become Jeff Bezos from making hi-fi equipment, that's for sure.
It's fascinating, as a consumer of high-end audio for many years, we talk about upgrading a component, but you don't ever talk about upgrading a painting or a sculpture. And so I think what you're getting, the essence of what you're getting at is, to me, it's very attractive because it's a singular item, like you said. It's a piece of art. It's something that we're not talking about revising a gain stage. We're talking about something that's more visceral than that. And so I do think that, and I've actually written a series of articles recently on where luxury purchases and high performance audio, where they intersect. And I simply do not think that there's a better example of that than what you're creating. And wow, I just appreciate the explanation. Well, Kostas, I have one more question for you,
Sure.
and that is something that I've been asking everyone in the SoundStage Talks series, and that is, tell us about a favorite recent listening experience. And since that could be in Greece or the Netherlands or Australia, tell us where it was as well.
For me, because I record concerts and I've recorded a lot of concerts, I have to honestly say the favorite listening experience would be, recording someone. And and there's a lot of them, to be very honest. I've been blessed when I started doing my concert work and developing the equipment to get the best possible recording. And you can download, I freely give people links to WAV files they can download to actually hear them for themselves. So they're not thinking I'm just one of these guys that records trains or frogs or something. But the blessing of actually recording great performers is like no other. That's between you and me, that's the real dream. And to be able to have a system that records, to then also be able to play it back. Now to sort of tell you what's my favorite recording, God, that would be, it's difficult. I've recorded some exceptional people, but see, ironically, the ones that impressed me the most, people that are probably not well known. So, and you can, I can again send you links to these recordings so you can hear for yourself why they blow me away. But I was very fortunate whilst I was recording in Australia. We had, people like Chick Corea and, Charles Dutoit and all these people coming to Australia. And they were very happy for me to record them. Although I can't sell their recordings. Of course, I could sell other recordings. But the truth is, I had the opportunity to record a lot of incredible people. But some of those people were okay, nothing special. And but at the same time, I was able to, record a lot of Australian classical performers who are world class, absolutely. People like Richard Tognetti, who's, the ACO, and when he goes to London or anywhere, he's as serious as Joshua Bell or anyone else. So those sorts of guys, for me, to answer that question, it would have to be people like a Richard Tognetti or people like the Benno Trio, which are three young guys who are unbelievable. This is classical. In jazz, there's people like Martin Breeze, who's unbelievable, or Alison Wedding, who used to be backing with Rolling Stones. And so she teaches in Berkeley, in the jazz school in America, of course. So there's people like that I've had the pleasure and have come through Melbourne when I was doing all the recording work, and they blew me away. And the sad thing was, I used to invite audiophiles to come to these sessions that I was doing, closed sessions, recording them, that they could, but they weren't interested. I used to think that's where I always found it amusing that, again, it's that strange relationship that hi-fi has with music. That's the funny thing. I'm passionate about music and passionate about musicians and understanding their interpretation or their own personal work. And that to me is that emotion. If you can catch that and bottle it and give it to people, I think that's the essence of what you and I are trying to do in high-end audio. But it's not for everyone. I noticed that a lot of high-end audio guys, they're not that worried about that. They're more interested in that cartridge versus that cartridge versus that cartridge versus that cartridge. It's a different sort of look, but that's okay. Each finds in what they do their own pleasure. But I thought when I first started all this, it was about music, and sadly, that sort of realization changed. But anyway, I'm about music. For me, the most important thing for a system to do is to get you not knowing you're in the front of the system. But the secondary value of the system, of course, is that it is very personal, very, as you said, visceral, it connects you, and you have a pleasure with it. You look at the lines and you think, we had the hi-fi shows in England, for example. A lot of women came in looking at the speakers and saying, you can't have that speaker. It has a better bump than me. So, that's that sort of strange sort of way of thinking that, why? At the end, they're beautiful objects, and that should be their raison d'être, full stop.
Well, Kostas, I really appreciate your time today, and I would encourage all of the SoundStage viewers and those that read the articles and features we put out to please go to the website, download the catalog, and just take a look for yourself to see the Metaxas Sins products. They're like nothing else in the world. I dare to say there probably won't be anything like them in the future.
I'm sure there's a young underswelling that is, there's young guys who, they say, hold on a second, there's no rules. No, I think that's important because you and I know we all stimulate everyone. Look, I had the pleasure of interviewing in my other work some crazy architects, some crazy fashion designers, and one of the designers called Romeo Gili, who is an architect. He said, as a fashion designer, you put everything into your collection, and then you inspire, and then you're just spent, and then you just have a break, but then the other people grab that energy, grab all that, and then they do something with it. So now I'm sure you will see some people, reacting, which is very good to what I'm doing. Look, I also get people who think what I do is a joke, to be honest. It's funny on Facebook, it's such a brutal and harsh world where some people, if a tape recorder looks like something else, it's totally wrong, or a speaker is not a box, it's totally wrong. And they're not shy of telling you that, what you're doing is a piece of, merit. So, that's the double-edged sword we live in. But you can't be thin-skinned. You have to do your thing. And, of course, people like yourself get it. But obviously, there's a lot that don't. But that doesn't matter. And that should never stop you, obviously. It's like the Queen's Gambit. Again, we go back to this TV series. This beautiful young girl is kicking ass of all these grand chess masters. And isn't that such a fantastic thing? It doesn't matter if she's a girl or what. I think the pleasure is that in a very old ancient Greek way, we still get excited when we see people that push boundaries, push things through. And that's what makes us, and even in times like now, which are pretty dire times, we need that. We need art. We need to know that there's more. It's not just, the everyday and we sort of stop at a certain level and that's it. And I think that's the most important message that what I do hopefully comes through. And it's not just about hi-fi. It's obviously about a way of thinking and a way of life. That's the important thing.
Well, Kostas, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll get a chance to chat again sometime in the future. But thank you for being part of SoundStage Talks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. And hopefully we see each other at a show when those things happen ever again, if they ever happen again.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, because otherwise, it's funny. How do you explain what you do? Unfortunately, the internet's great, but you and I know you need to physically touch it and look at it.
Yeah.
Big difference. Anyway, nice talking to you.
All right, talk to you soon.